Y'all, UFOs have been a hot buzzword lately, and they've been popping up everywhere. Even as UFO sightings posted are low, people are still constantly talking about them, and they're even popping up on the news. We even have our government trying to find out what they are. Allegedly. Honestly, it's all been an uptick ever since the Las Vegas UFO incident, where a UFO allegedly crashed into Angel Kenmore's family backyard and these dark, shadowy entities emerged. I mean, it's quite obvious that we're not alone, not just because of that event, but we've even recently talked about finding the building blocks of life on an asteroid and finding these strange square and rectangular structures on Mars. Now, with all of this hullabaloo, what I've noticed is that there is something in the UFO community that is not being talked about enough and definitely being overlooked. And that is UFO/alien abductions. And what's wild about UFO abductions is that we don't just have accounts of people being abducted, but we have accounts of people being there while someone else was being abducted and they saw it too. So let's jump into some terrifying UFO abductions today, starting with the Gundiah Mackay abduction. Amy Ryland, then 22, her husband Keith, and her friend Petra were all hanging out at the Ryland's residence in Gundiah, Australia, October of 2001. After a few board games and drinks, they called it a night. At around 11:15 p.m., Petra was awoken by some startling sounds in the living room. When she walked in, she saw her friend Amy being carried out of the window in sleeping position by a beam of light. That could not be. I think I'd freak out. Could you imagine that? Petra woke Keith, but by the time he made it to the living room, Amy was gone. All that was left was a torn curtain in the living room, and the dirt outside of the window had been burnt. That was the only evidence they had, but even still, they phoned the police concerned about their friend and wife. Of course, this didn't work out the way they planned because the police didn't really take them seriously. And although now we are much more comfortable talking about UFOs and aliens, I don't blame them. It was very taboo back then. It was taboo until recently. I don't think maybe I wouldn't have believed them at the time. However, Keith and Petra would end up getting a lead 90 minutes later in the form of a call from a woman in Mackay, Australia, who says that they were with Amy in the hospital, and Amy was startled and a little bit dehydrated, which I completely understand. The really confusing and mysterious part, though, is that Mackay, Queensland is 3 hours away from where Amy lives and where the abduction took place, meaning she traveled 3 hours in only 90 minutes. Luckily, Amy was uninjured. However, they did find red marks and weird looking, I guess, symbols, but etched into the skin on her upper thighs and her heels. Now, Amy does have some memories from the abduction. She says that she remembers laying back on a cold slab and she was unable to move. She was nervous and panicking, but there were tall figures there watching over her and comforting her, encouraging her and telling her to calm down. However, as they were calming her down, they were also taking samples, whatever that may mean. And even though this only lasted 90 minutes, even though there was like a 3 hour travel span, Amy's hair and body hair had grown significantly, almost as if she was gone for several weeks or even months. Oh, I just think that's so strange, like the weird missing time, but then it kind of makes sense because, the deeper you get into space, the more time dilates, and oh, that's just a lot to pick apart. I mean, I can imagine how scared she was when they were taking samples or whatever. Like I personally would be petrified. And what's crazy is that not all abduction victims are adults. Like some people are abducted as children. Take, for example, the abduction of Jesse Long. Jesse Long was just 5 years old when he was first abducted. He and his brother were exploring in the woods near their house when they found a clearing with a mysterious circular object in it and a very tall, strange, thin, sickly looking man. When the kids saw the man, he looked at them and paralyzed them, seemingly with his mind. Jesse remembers actually being taken into the craft and being placed on a cold, long slab. He says as he was on this table, he couldn't move, but he felt these beings poking and prodding in his legs and upper thighs. What's really interesting is that it wasn't his only abduction. Jesse claims that these abductions continued into early adulthood, and as he started reaching puberty, the experiments began changing. They started extracting semen from him, and this what he called a cross-breed experimentation with a female alien. Could you imagine what that child support looks like? Jesse claims that in 1990, the aliens came back and introduced him into to a younger alien, a baby alien, who they claimed was his hybrid son, which is bananas. Like honestly, especially no, we're going to Maury. Like I are you I want a paternity test. Jesse began sharing his story in 2017 at the age of 65. And he says that he knows a lot of people might not believe him, but he didn't want to leave this earth without explaining what he had been through. And honestly, I mean, I hope he's living even longer. I hope he lives another 20, 30 years. It is possible. But I understand where he's coming from, and I am more inclined to believe him because it did seem more like a let me get this off my chest before I die, as opposed to let me make up this story and do a whole bunch of crap with it. So I do think his story is genuine and just a very eerie that they were doing those cross-breeding experiments. Oh my goodness. Next, we have one of the most famous UFO abduction events in history. You may already know exactly which one I'm talking about. It is the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. Betty and Barney Hill were driving home from their amazing vacation in Niagara Falls in September of 1961. As Barney was driving, he noticed a strange light in the sky coming down and closer to the car. Confused, he began to try to focus in on it, and as he looked, he saw 11 humanoid figures in tight black leather suits and capes, which I think is probably the best part of this. I think the capes are so funny and cool. Barney gets out his car and pulls out his binoculars to get a better look at this thing, and he realizes that the 11 humanoid figures are actually watching him and Betty, which rightfully freaks Barney out. So he jumps in the car and they jet off to go home. Now, what was odd is that Barney and Betty, on their way home, started experiencing what they call severe buzzing. And it was less a sound and more in their head. And Betty recalls that when they got home, their trip that should have taken roughly 3 or 4 hours ended up taking 7 hours, and they couldn't account for the missing time. What's stranger still is that the Hills' clothes were seemingly torn in strange and mysterious places, and Betty found what she called pink powder all over her dress. Now, as time went on, Betty began to have intense dreams about the experience, and memories started flooding back in. They did some therapy and, memory regression therapy to see if they could remember anything from that night. And some memories did come to light. Betty actually remembers them doing experimentations on her and sticking a needle into her navel. This sounds more like this cross-breeding experimentation they had going on. She claims, however, that they also were taking skin samples. Now, th- to me, that sounds terrifying. What I find interesting is that maybe we just get scared because we're humans and we're not used to it. Because kind of like the first story, one thing that I do like about Betty and Barney Hill's story is that Betty says that she got a tour of the craft, and that one of the aliens actually showed her a star map, and showed her where they were from, and where they are now, relative to the where Earth is. And I found that very interesting. It reminds me of the first abduction story we were talking about, where Amy said that the tall aliens, while they were doing the experimentations, they were also trying to comfort her and encourage her and say, hey, almost like, we have to do this. It's like our job, kind of like how your doctor has to give you a shot, but we're not trying to hurt you. Like, it's that word of encouragement, or showing that kindness. And I love that. It makes me feel a lot better about the situation, because otherwise this sounds terrifying. Now, I love the Betty and Barney Hill incident, and there's actually a lot more to it. So if you like this video and like this kind of content, let me know. We can probably do a deep dive just on the Betty and Barney Hill experience, because they had a hell of an experience. And honestly, it's pretty credible. I say this because Betty and Barney Hill were very, very respected in their community. Barney was involved in the civil rights movement, and he was really about helping people out. Honestly, they were both kind souls. Betty herself was a social worker, so she was all about helping people out. And they built a really deep trust and understanding, and love and nurturing in their community. And the community, honestly, their community trusts them. And I do too. They had a good life, and I don't see them needing to lie about this. It just seemed like they had a traumatizing experience, and they decided, hey, we think we should share this with the world, because it's really odd and we don't know what's going on. Now, as I said, these are terrifying. They are. Like, it's scary to think a needle injected into your navel. Get out of here. And like the crossbreeding experiments. But I love the sense of, maybe it's something that needs to be done, and it's just a job, almost like, again, your doctor giving you a shot, because the beings do seem to be encouraging, and sometimes kind to the humans. Again, like these two cases where the tall beings are trying to calm them down, and be kinder. I've heard experiences that haven't gone so good. Maybe we'll do some more videos on this, but it does seem that they at least try to take care of the humans, so I see that as a little bit of a silver lining. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. How do you feel about all of these abductions, and how do you feel about this video? Also, make sure that you check out that compilation and those paranormal videos right there.